Howdy, partners. It's your favorite CloudRadial VP of Product here, Ricky Cicchini. If you've ever been curious about compliance and data visualization in CloudRadial, this is the video for you. This is a trimmed down version of one of our tips and tricks webinars. Follow it and you'll get the best practices to get your policies up to speed so that you can prove your value to clients while even uncovering new opportunities for revenue. Enjoy! What are policies? How do they work? Policies are something that's intended for more of a bill paying point of contact, kind of administrative decision maker to explore. And they exist under the compliance tab over here. I might zoom in a little bit to get a little better screen share visibility. Compliance and policies right here. Now, if you've never touched them or been afraid or not sure what all this is happening, again, this is the place for you because I'm going to go through all of it. But the gist is, if you're a non-technical user and you got to figure out what's going on and you want to figure out how your infrastructure is doing, and I do use the term infrastructure a lot because it comprises more than just endpoints, this is the place to do it. So the general challenge that we see, and this is kind of the ground up for CloudRadial, was that we know there's a trillion tools out there that do reporting, and a trillion tools do it different ways. And the other issue that we have, or maybe not issue, but the fact is everyone picks a different level of technicality to explain it. So there are some tools that are very, very fluffy, right? That are like more marketing style of just like, you've got issues with efficiency. We should fix that by doing stuff. And then clients are kind of like high level, okay. Then the majority of ones that we deal with are ones that go way too technical. So we do that too. And I don't blame the vendors. I understand where it comes from. An example of what way too technical would look like to a typical decision maker would be more like if we go to infrastructure and endpoints. So I'll be bouncing back and forth between these two sessions because I will reiterate policies are not just endpoint reports, but a lot of the policies are driven by endpoint data. And when we look at this data, a traditional report from an RMM, from a inventory reporting tool, whatever have you, is typically going to look like something like this, right? So in this case, this is the CloudRadial agent piling in the data into CloudRadial. I always pick on Mike Chasen's computer here. Okay, you got some details. The idea is that if you click on it and drill into it and really get into it, you got a bunch of data, right? So you got Windows Defenders, the AV, what current OS release is it on? We'll ignore the policy exceptions for a sec, because obviously that's the point. The storage, the configuration, blah, 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 blah. If you're working with a co-managed situation where you have an IT guy on the inside, or maybe you're, handling it with some technicality, this can be pretty good, right? Giving people a report shows them the visibility, but raw technical data doesn't do a good job of showing what about it, right? We know that traditionally MSPs come in with like warranty expiration is a pretty easy one, going you're out of warranty, you're in warranty, the value's pretty clear, stuff's expensive, replace it entirely, all that discussion. But what we don't really have a good, clear way of doing, and this is where tools vary, is what do you want to do about it? For example, if you have no knowledge of computers, like Safi, I won't pick on you too much, but can you tell me if an i7 1100 and 370 is a good or bad processor?
I have no idea.
I have no idea. And if I told you that was top of the line, or if I told you that was years outdated,
I believe you.
you wouldn't know, right? Or
but I would kind of, you know me, I'm a digger.
It's
and
true.
I would be in there going, well, what do you mean? I like to have a little backup. I like the transparency, like to be able to look myself. So,
and that's the thing. It's like sometimes you got people that will just say, like Safi, she'll go, I think she'll want to understand it. She might Google it. She might chat GPT it now, right?
Oh yeah, chat GPT. I'm big on that.
Right. You'd be like, is this good or bad? Do I care about this? Is this serial number anything? Do we care about this? And then you got other clients again with that. What we're seeing nowadays is that a lot of times they look at this and they're just like, I don't know. But if you're coming in with, again, we'll use something very kind of low level, like a simple replacement of a machine or several machines, people can start to argue because they're like, I don't know what this really does. Is this good? Is this bad? And it's kind of based on your word. And this is the problem that a lot of MSPs have, which is if you're going to sit down with a client and educate them whether this is good or bad in your perspective, is this an outdated machine? Is it causing problems? That's a long discussion to have for one specific thing. It's not very strategic. So you can blow a business review talking about one line item and one thing times whatever, when in reality, you've got stuff like, what about the software on there? Is anything risky? What about the security stuff? What about I don't know, does the RAM matter? What if you have 2 gigs of RAM and it's a terrible machine? All that stuff requires a lot of conversation. So even though tools can give this data, your RMM, if you have an RMM, they can give this data and more. the reason that we have our own agent is because we wanted to take only the stuff that we could make a discussion out of. And again, we'll talk about how that all applies, but between the like networks, I'm sorry, endpoints and servers are part of that. But then you get bigger into bigger discussions. What about like, okay, so your license counts, right? So again, I've got 14 out of 14 business basic licenses, Power Automate free, whatever. I've got a bunch and I only got 5 used. But you start to wrap in stuff. So you've got what about endpoint data and server data and user data and M365. I don't know who is an administrator in there. So you've got all these different pieces that you can get inside of CloudRadial by hooking it up. But just because it's in a portal or just because you've aggregated it in another system does not necessarily mean the client can put it all together. So that's what policies are for. Policies are nothing more than rules applied to a bunch of data in a way that you can control it. So the idea is that with a policy, you set your standards as the MSP, right? You tell me what's a pain in the butt to support. Where do you draw the line, right? Again, a lot of good examples that we have with MSPs when we talk through this stuff is like, again, we'll stick to hardware because it's simple to understand in this sense. And nobody wants to support a modern machine that has 4 gigs of RAM that everybody works off of because it's going to be slow. It's going to put in a bunch of tickets. Everything sucks. Everything breaks, and that's where you start to come in with a recommendation. But how you do that in bulk is you would go in and say like, hey, we got an issue with, again, maybe it's efficiency. We got old technology, your server's old. You've got stuff that's out of warranty. You've got certain issues that are hurting your productivity. So like modern disk storage, like you're not running with SSDs. You got hard drives, whatever. You may run into, yeah, let's replace the hard drive with an SSD, but really a policy can start to have that discussion going, how many of your computers don't have SSDs? 7. Instead of just doing 7, storage replacements, maybe it's time and it makes more sense, tickets and all the effort versus just replacing the machines. It would be more cost effective to replace it. So policies visualize a lot of that data and they're supposed to drive the discussion up to a more strategic thing. And that's what you can do when you kind of equalize all the way that the data comes in. You can have kind of like that specific discussion. So
But I want to say something here, Ricky, about this
yes,
though, is that, going back to the agent, because I know that the MSPs are always like, oh, another agent, kind of thing.
sure.
But one thing that Cloud Radial does real well, and as Ricky said, I'm not as techy as most, but I'm getting there, is that we structured this data so differently that your clients can actually understand it.
Right.
And so, and for me, in using Cloud Radial, I can kind of look at things and go, okay, we need to start upgrading computers and we need to start doing this. And I'm not a big believer in extending warranties either. I'm just like, buy something else, which is an opportunity for you. But if you think of me as the client, you need to talk them into getting better technology. We've got AI going. We've got different, processing that needs to be done. If they've had a computer for 3 years, they need to upgrade. So you need to sell them something else. And with the economic conditions as they are, you need to set them up for success to kind of weather the storm. So I'm a big believer in get things upgraded. I mean, we're doing it here. I'm like, okay, getting ready to see some increases in hardware costs. Let's upgrade developer units and sales units and so forth. But I'm able to see it because I can see it inside the policy report. And I'm also able to see it inside that area. See, I look at that infrastructure a lot, so I can kind of look at the different machines and so forth. But, use this as an opportunity, and I know that I'm kind of going off on the tangent on the equipment, but, you know, we structure it so you understand it, your client can understand it, and this is a great opportunity to use this now for your clients.
That's really what it is. Because again, it's like a lot of MSPs get caught in that trap where if we're talking about like, let's just pick a random one now. So maybe it's not even related to endpoints, right? Endpoints is an easy one to hammer in on, but like, let's do this. Security has this strong authentication user. So basically, do they have MFA on, right? Sometimes MFA doesn't mean anything. So you might see instances on purpose where CloudRadial language doesn't really match what MSPs say because we purposefully keep it simple for the non-technical, but this is MFA, right? So what this does is like, and obviously we turned MFA off for our tenant to show a nightmare scenario, but um, the idea is that you're not necessarily having to dive into all the technicality, but you're having the discussion like if I'm doing a QBR or whatever business review or just a chat with Safi, who's my client, I can go, hey, this is really important for XYZ reason. You can see based on our data, based on our reports, that we have this issue. If she goes, I believe you, what do you want to do about it? Fantastic. We're off to, revenue opportunities, or at the very least, just a better client because they're listening to you and they get more consultative advice, and that's a better relationship. At worst case scenario, if they start going, I don't believe you, or show me the data or whatever, it's nice to be able to go, well, the data is right here, right? We're pulling it from our endpoint report. We're pulling it from this, from that, from whatever. So again, hopefully the use case of policies is pretty clear. Now let's get into the nitty gritty of this part, which is how do you set it up? What do you like? What do you not like? How do you even figure out what's good? Well, let's look at a policy individually here, and then I'll show you how your tenant should be set up, and how you can kind of go from there. So when you go to add a policy, you are literally saying, what are we checking for, right? So you got a bunch of different types of them. And again, I'll pick endpoints because there's plenty of those. So when we look at like an endpoint policy, then you have a drop down that says like, here's all the things that CloudRadial can do. I'll talk about where this is going for the product in general, because there's a lot of talk about our endpoints API. There's some custom policy stuff that's more advanced. We'll address it, but for right now, if you're like, let's just talk about what policies are. Again, what rule do you want to apply on what area that you can? So if you're doing something, let's call it, the developers would say Boolean, binary, yes or no, right? Managed by Intune. Is this machine managed by Intune? Yes or no, right? You click on that. You can change the name of these things. You can change the description. So when it shows up in reports, when clients click on it, whatever language you want to use, if you just want to say, is it good? Does it have the right thing for us to manage? If you keep it super simple, cool. If you keep it more technical and they know what Intune is, whatever, cool. You got full on control over this. But the more interesting thing is this testing stuff, right? This is where a lot of MSPs they talk to us, and it's like we've had discussions, we've had arguments, we've had collaboration, because a lot of tools measure things in different ways. And what one of the big visions for CloudRadial was, if we're going to have these policies, it's got to be transparent. And you can disagree with how we do it, but we need you to know exactly. So it's not enough that I say, is it managed by Intune? Each policy has this about this policy button, so you can know how it's looking for stuff. So again, in this case, it's specifically looking for the Intune agent on the computer from the program list and just saying like, does it have it? Yes, no. If you go into basically any policy, so let's just do like OneDrive documents mapping, same thing. How does it look for that? It's going to tell you exactly how it finds it, if it's applicable to Mac devices, if it's not, whatever have you, right? So it gives you the flexibility to understand exactly what you're putting for new clients, exactly how we're measuring it. And if, again, you may have processes that are completely legitimate, completely valid, but they don't get picked up the right way, rather than waiting for a vendor to change a bunch of code to match your stuff, you can either accept this thing and change your processes if you want, or you can just say, we're not going to use that policy because it'll make us look bad. And this is where people kind of look for policies and they go like, wait a minute. I turned it on and we look really stupid now because all of a sudden it says the security's off and the productivity is no good. And this is the thing. If you're going to use policies, the one thing you have to do, this is the necessary evil, is you have to give them a look. You have to see if you agree with what they're looking for and if it's relevant to you. We put a bunch of the sample ones out there, but it's up to you to just take a meander and gander at these things and go like, yep, that's cool. Does it only apply to a certain operating system? Do I want that on laptops, desktops, virtuals, whatever have you? And even servers. Servers get their own type and so on and so forth, right? So you can specify exactly what it looks for. And more specifically, this is one of those on-off. If you have a more interesting policy that requires what we call parameters, basically like you call how much is too little or too much. Let's monitor count's a good one, but I usually use free space available. So free space available is one that's talking about how much space is on the drive, literally that the computer has, the C drive, typically the main drive. And this is one of the ones that's like, I don't know. What do you think? Is 10% bad? Because then you start getting into things going like, are they not using cloud storage? Do they have inadequate stuff? Are they at risk for a loss if they lose that computer and they're storing a bunch of stuff on there? And this one gets this extra field called required parameter. So it's like, again, how much of the free space left do you want it before it causes a problem? Is it 20%, 10%, 100%? That would be a bad idea, right? So depending on the policies, and obviously for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of the ones, you could see that you kind of pick the ones that you want. Furthermore, you can do stuff like sending alerts. I personally don't recommend it because chances are you probably have some triggers that can do it, that can alert you of these problems. But hey, if you want to be alerted when someone's, again, in the case we're looking at right now, their hard drive goes past 30% space available and then it keeps going down 20%, 10%, and you want to head it off, you could totally flip this on. And as long as you set the routing for that policy, you can even send tickets letting you know, like, hey, Safi's computer just exceeded the 30%, whatever have you. More importantly, go ahead, Safi.
Go ahead. I was going to go back and ask you a question. We have a question from Stephen Grabowski, which I know
Sure.
probably like didn't answer pronounce your name right. I'm sorry. But he's asking about like when you go back and you look at the policy for old technology in
Sure.
testing, he
Mhm.
says that it states that they're using the 3 years as the old technology is more than 3 years. And so he
Mhm.
wants to know how to modify that and how he can change that to 4 or 5 years as some of their warranties go up to 5 years. So how does he?
Required parameter. So by default, it's going to be 3 years if you put nothing, but over here you would do it in months. So 5 years would be what, 60? I think. Is that 60? Yeah. So
So how would he? Does he modify the testing? Can he do that?
the testing.
The description in there. So for his
Oh,
MSP, yeah.
this one doesn't get modified because this is specifically only going to show up for MSPs, but you
Okay.
can change the description here. So in here, you would put in an old technology for the description because this part's client facing. You would say like, oh, you're over 5 years or whatever, right? You could say looks for workstations over 5 years old, right? And then all of a sudden you go to 60 because again, it's going to
Okay. So you can overwrite the default.
exactly, right? And again,
Okay.
all it's saying, and I'll put a thingy in there to put spaces. I hate when they don't do that. Tooltips, you gotta have spaces, whatever.
Mm.
Anyways, 36 is the default, but that's a good question. And that's exactly the right mindset, right? And we see people that go like inherently policies seem useful, but it can bite you in the butt because if you're telling them in person going like, hey, 5 years is old, you don't know what you're doing, CloudRadial, and you just go, bah, turn on the default policies. All of a sudden, your clients are like, what, man? We said we were good. Our computers are 4 years old. You said that's fine. CloudRadial's default is 3. You told them 5. All of a sudden, their thing mismatches. That's where most people kind of get into a sticky spot with policies is they don't look at what they're going for. But I think Steve's question is good. Um, it's a great question because I think that's the point of
Yeah, I
all.
mean, it's really just going in and looking at those policies and seeing what they can do for you, but also knowing that you've got that parameter field is kind of
Yeah.
where you can tweak things out.
And let me say this too, because then it comes down to the visual part of this, right? So you kind of get the idea, and again, this is policy by policy, but when you look at this and you're like, oh man, we're red. Oh man, we're yellow and green. How do you reach
It
those?
freaks me out.
Like people look for that, and
Good for
obviously
the clients.
you're like, I get what red is, but what is like for the MSPs out there now? It's like, what is red? What does red actually mean? Well, how do I make it yellow versus red? And that's where it can be kind of an interesting. Again, your opinion is really what's happening here. That's interesting. So when you get into a policy, we'll pick another one, right? Endpoint, we'll do whatever. We get the free space available one, and we get down to risk scoring. So this is relatively simple. All risk scoring is going to do is going to go, which one of these things do you want this to attribute to, right? Do you think having not enough free space is an efficiency issue? Is it a backup issue? Is it whatever? You pick, whatever one of these that you want. Then the risk score. So the risk score is basically saying like, how many points is this going to cost them if they, you know, flag? If this is saying 20% space, Safi hits that 20%, boom, she comes up as a problem, as an exception. How many points is that? You call the points. It could be 10 billion, it could be one, it could be 50, whatever. What's the actual logic? And this is in our documentation as well, but the actual logic of these things is if a category, the entire category of efficiency or productivity or whatever, exceeds 100, it gets flagged as red. If it's 1 to 99, it's yellow, and if it's 0, it's green. That's all it is to it. So you can make these look hyper dramatic and you can weigh them based off of what you think. Again, something kind of silly like as your not silly, but is your OneDrive, mapped to your desktop, right? That's pretty good, but like maybe that's a 5 points, right? Is your antivirus installed? They don't have that. That's an immediate 100. Doesn't matter if one person fails it or 50, right? It's going to automatically flag them as red. We can't have that happen. So that's why you've got a real flexibility here. And then the other nice thing is to not freak out clients. Some clients don't appreciate seeing their security risk score be 25 trillion, even though it could be.
Yeah,
So
just stick to the 100 is what I
yeah, but you could also do this
kind of bossy. Just stick to that.
by the each means that every single time you find somebody that doesn't have that, right? This is still the free space available. So this is saying that like Safi's computer fails that policy, 100 points. My computer, 100 points. Somebody else's computer, 100 points. So all of a sudden you're at 300, quite a bit. If you want to be a little bit more lenient, you can switch to any, which basically means that that policy is now is like is basically yes or no. We are going to count 100 points until everybody is free and clear of that policy. That prevents super high scores, and it basically goes like, this is a higher level for your org, or like again, yes or no. Like, do we have this problem? Until everybody's cleared, it'll go to zero. If 50 people have it, it'll still just go to 100. So these are the nuances that you get into when you're really into presenting and making sure people don't knee jerk and go like, holy crap, why 55,000 points? But that's the gist. And when you have all that dialed in the way you like it, ultimately you end up like this, and you end up with something that's really reliable because again, you know the standards you're looking for, you know how they measure, and then the next thing is you can kind of slice and dice them whatever way you want to. So that stoplight report exists, you could look at them this way, and you can see the numeric values to them, going like, oh man. And this is something that, again, now you're kind of bringing the conversation down to the client level. You're not talking about how many, gigs of RAM are there on there because you are measuring that, but really what you're saying is like, hey, like, this is going to slow you down. It's going to slow down your productivity, 225. I bet you if we could focus this quarter on getting you down to like 100 or getting you down to whatever, that shows progress. It shows the stuff that is good. You can run through this at any point going like, look, last month we had this report, and I'll show you that with the run report that showed you at 6,000. Now we're at 400. Yeah, you're still red, but we've made a lot of progress. And you can prove that you're actually monitoring and looking after these things. And that's part of that golden thing that this Reddit thread's after, right? It's like, if you have everything green across the board, can you still get credit for that? Or are people just like, whatever? Well, again, you're still running those things. You're still running reports. You're still running tools. You're still doing your day to day to keep those things green. So you have to show them. And this policy report is a pretty good way to do it. Now,
I mean, that policy report is very, very powerful.
it's pretty
Um,
good. And I want to show how it gets done at scale because that's the other thing that people kind of lose track of. And you don't have to see this as some monumental, oh my God, it's going to take me months to do it. Because it can if you want to get hyper into it. But really, it's pretty simple. Let's take a look at why. If you go to your partner content area, right, you got all the sample content that comes into your portal. And if you have a relatively new portal, I think I changed this, a year, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but depending on what your stuff looks like, it might be a little different. You should have the policy folders broken up by type. So if we look at the content area, the typical thing that we do with your deployed tenant is you would have like these packages, like endpoint policies around a folder, an application, or whatever. So what starting with policies looks like today, if you were to get off this call and be like, neat, I'll try a couple out, is you would probably start by looking at these and going, okay, what do I have out the box? Do I care about these, right? Immediately you're like, oh, software installed. What is it looking for? You click it and you're like, okay, software looking for a specific piece of software, looking for Skype for business. Yuck. We did that on purpose because people would see that and go, I don't care about that. You want to go in and modify it, delete it. Do you want to look for specific software? Do you not want to look for specific software? Get out of here. So you review this, you kind of cut down and modify whatever ones you like. Again, that example of the what's old technology, people vary that all the time. What do they think is old? Old for a server, typically longer than a workstation endpoint. And then you can add more into each file and folder as you like.
okay, so Ricky, we've got another question, which is really good.
Sure.
Um, and that is when you go through and edit all of the policies,
Mhm.
is that for all clients? So I know when you go to that content area, it's for all clients, or is it just for that client? Is there a way to edit it globally?
Well, that's a brilliant question. And that's exactly what I think a lot of MSPs run into as well. So, again, by default, we don't tell you who the policy applies to. We just say, here's a bunch of policies. You tell us who it goes to. And my usual go-to when I do implementations, or even the implementation team that we have now that runs through this themselves, we'll recommend if you're dipping your toes in here, first things first, just like think general. Just see if it works, see if you like it, see if you can kind of dial it in the way you want to. And in that logic, if you can get your base standards that are like, here's our minimums, you can get that exact thing going, right? Endpoint policies is currently going to applying to every user in all companies. That's the global standard. When you add a new company into CloudRadial, they are going to get measured from those endpoints on your standard. So it's a quick 2-second way of going, where do you land? Specifically, when it comes to agents, by the way, I'll just mention this as a thing. Our agent data and sync cycle is such that the agents are supposed to check in once per day. And then the policies also run overnight and they check in once per day. So what happens is the agent data comes in, we check them, we have every day, this is a fresh report, it's real and up to date. And even if you made a change like today, like I've had a lot of MSPs do whoopsie daisies where they were supposed to prep for a QBR and they're like, whoops, I fixed that configuration issue 10 minutes before the meeting. I wanted to reflect on here. You can always manually push the sync too. So if you make a change, it'll go, yeah, cool, we're up to date. So long story short, yes, you can go through content and you've got all the folders. And my recommendation is set your standards, apply it to everybody. When you get a better mastery, and this is what more advanced MSPs are doing with well, maybe not more advanced, but more policy prone MSPs, what they'll do is they'll take a package, right? So let's say you got these endpoint policies, and all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I'm going to save this package as, I'm going to make a copy of it. And then what I'll do is maybe when I make a copy, I'll call these medical or whatever, right? Then what you got is an identical content package of those policies. And you're like, you know what? For the average person, for like, Joe Schmo's flower shop, meh, whatever. I can put some pretty lenient parameters. But when it comes to my medical clients, software, they have to have this proprietary software installed. They have to have this thing. They have to be Windows 11 ready for compliance, this, that. So this is a nice way to do it because you can take your same set. And then what that comes down to is instead of publishing it to all companies, you can go in and take this content package, edit it, and put it to medical companies or whatever have you, right? So that's the more advanced use case. Don't think you have to do that, but that's what a lot of the people that I work with that do the advanced usage of this do. They create their custom things and they kind of grade them harsher or more lenient depending on the industry they're in, right? So that's how you can keep it kind of flexible. I'm going to delete this, but that's the gist.
How long does it take for the policies to populate the data after we've configured after he's configured the base on the existing, endpoints with the agents installed?
It should be on first sync. So I think when you deploy them, they don't do it immediately. They do it on the next sync cycle. So like, again, the exact thing would be, let's say I go into my policies here, I make a change to application policies, I push them out. CloudRadial detected that change. We're all good. But for it to actually show up in the report for Evans Bakery or Holy Trinity or whatever, next business day, unless you go in there and you're looking for that immediacy. So if I go into Holy Trinity here and I go to their Complemento and Politicas, I may need to check my localization on that. Boom, and then you hit sync, right? Bam, that would force it to do it that day. But if you touch nothing and you set it and forget it, it would do the next day automatically. And then last but not least, okay, how do we visualize it? So we have the visualization in-app. That's fine, right? Obviously, people can get to it. And again, by default, the compliance tab is only going to be something that your higher privileged admins can do. It's not like you're having to do this for day-to-day people. You get into the thing of like, can I bring this out of the portal? What do I do? You got a couple options there, actually. And I don't think a lot of people know what you can do with them. And again, they depend on the type of customer you're dealing with. So if I'm in the compliance area, and again, this is more for like account managing purposes, you can drive your customers here and go check out your policies. I want to have a discussion. That's one way. Method number two is you can actually pull reports. I don't really like these that much because they're very dry, but you could do this if you're looking for a very simple, like, hey, this is what's going on. Oh, actually, I'm going to put an asterisk on myself and show you guys something cool that comes up all the time too. I'll explain why this guy right here has a strike through it. This is a really interesting use case that you guys might run into. But either way, the big picture here is that you can give them something like this and actually take it and put it somewhere. We also have this in a code.
Okay, so where do you have that? Do you have that set up as a policy report?
It's just you click on the report itself on that customer. So this is a little different. And then when you click on this, the reason we have this as a clip, like just straight Word doc, you can also get the HTML, which is cool because if you're a style freak and you really like to make it look cool, take this and chuck it into an AI, chuck it into your own design team, whatever, throw it however you like it and make this really cool looking, right? You could do that. Or what a lot of MSPs do that want to make it even simpler is the visualization in the in-app reports. So under partner and settings, if you go to report layouts over here on the right-hand side, you can decide what makes it into CloudRadial's like branded reports. And when you go to add those reports, you're saying like, what do you want to include in there? give it a name, give it a description, pretty simple stuff. You can choose whether to make this client visible, and I'll show what that looks like in a moment as well. But mostly it's just like, what do you want to include in the report? The majority of stuff we're talking about right here is policy review, typically
Have
paired.
them make a report and we'll show them
Yeah, I mean, we got
how
so
it
many
goes
here.
over an
So like
account.
I got the comprehensive ones, whatever. This little flag right here, show this report option, is what lets, so comprehensive report has this. Let's turn it off for one of these, like license report. Let's say I don't want this to be client
That's
visible.
my favorite report.
No, I'll fix it after, I promise.
Okay.
So after I can get my Mac bar to hide. Get away from here. There we go. Um, I'll turn that off. So what happens is under account, this is within that individual client report. Account reports shows the reports you have available. I just turned off license report. It'll show up here. If you want to run it globally, you can run all reports at any time without having to impersonate and go into each company's by going to partner clients. Same thing. I'm showing you different ways to get the same functionality. So if I wanted to run it for my company or any other one like Digital Torch or Digital Efforts Demo, you just click on them and click on reports. And then every report it goes, which one do you want? So all that checkbox does that I was flipping on and off is lets them choose whether they can run it or not. So that's it. But
And I really think that license report, and I know I'll go on about that report since it's my favorite one, but I was giving a demo years ago to someone and I showed them that report. Do you remember this, Ricky? Because
I
I had
do.
to build the report for me, but I had them, do this report. We put it over on the client side so that they could see it. And once I got here, he's like, okay, I'm done. I'll buy it. And I said, what? And he goes, yeah, he goes, it's worth it just for this report. Because he had one client that was driving him nuts, asking, like daily,
Yeah.
can I see the report, so forth. So, they said
Yeah.
client to put it in there.
And
So
that's where it comes to like this is where I'm not saying you have to use this. Some people don't even know these exist and they're fine with it. But if you run into a situation where again, like the policies we're talking about, I want to focus on the technology review. So I want to see the policies. I want to see what's going on. Having this supplier branding and give them a fresh report can give you a more official way than just like here's a Word doc or whatever prepared by whatever. Obviously, this is prepared by my MSP for my MSP, but otherwise it would say, their stuff. The branding itself comes from the branding setup you do in the tenant when you first set it up. And even then, if you don't know how to do that, just check out the documentation on our KB. Just type in branding and it'll tell you all about
but
this.
even in that comprehensive report, I mean, a lot of this,
Or let's
if
see
not
that.
all of it, is your QBR.
Yeah.
So your clients have live access to that QBR data, so that when you do get the appointment and schedule that appointment to talk to them, you can talk more about the outcomes that you can provide for that company instead of going back to filling your bill, saying what you've done in the past, because everything is right there. And if there's any issues, they can kind of, they're flagged in there, but it's there. So when you do talk to the client, use that time wisely, especially now. They're going to be looking for cost savings. They're going to be looking for ways to make people more productive. What other things can we automate inside of processes inside of CloudRadial?
Yeah.
So, this is it's an interesting time, but I think it's also an interesting, opportunity for MSPs for their
Yeah.
QBRs.
Well, you gotta be careful because like I'll balance that out. I mean, if anyone who's watching what just happened there, like you saw it took a while to run and even was like not responding, come back. This is a demo tenant. This isn't even real data. And still it like timed out because it took a minute to run a 129 page report. Look at me. Look at me in the eyes right here. Do not give your clients a 129 page report. I swear to God.
Yeah, don't do that. Do the summary one.
Do a summary, do whatever. Just because we can give you that power, don't do it. But if you're looking for something that they go like, oh yeah, they can benchmark themselves and then see like everything from the planner, which I know is not the topic of discussion today, to all the policies and where we're at, is a good way to say like, here we are, here's our time and place. We are tracking all these things. We know where you're at. We've recommended stuff, and it's like a good CYA, right? It's good cover your butt, CYB. Um, because you have all this stuff in there. So the visualization exists in the app. It exists in the reports. It's up to you on what works best. Some clients of MSPs are totally cool with just going like, it's in the portal, whatever, I'll check it whenever I want. Cool. Other clients are like, if I don't have a thing I can grab and go, where are we at? Like they don't believe it. So that's why this really exists in the first place.
But
And
also they need to know that it's a stamp in time because this data
correct.
is live.
Right.
So I stamped this at, April 17th, 2025 at 11:46. And when you go in at 11:47, that data may be a little bit different.
Correct. Yes. Now I'll get back to something I mentioned that I wanted to cover. So just as an edge case, but it happens frequently enough that we obviously had to anticipate and add a feature for it. What happens if my default policy for people is like, hey, I need everybody to have this employee monitoring software or whatever on there. You got to have it. And then the CEO goes like, well, not me, because I'm the CEO. So you get into sticky situations where you have a bulk policy that applies to 99.9%, then you get those weird exceptions like, ugh. So if you have that, and I'll use an example here. So let's say Windows 11 readiness is probably one of the more popular policies, obviously, because end of life is happening soon. So are they ready for Windows 11 upgrade? Yes or no? You click this and you're like, oh, cool. Whoa, whoopsie daisy. Jeff's computer that we love so much runs some proprietary software that totally gets bricked with Windows 10 or Windows 11 upgrade. So yes, he should, but I don't care. And I don't want the person who's paying me to get hammered on something that we've already talked about being an exception. So this will continue to show exceptions no matter what. You cannot hide, you cannot delete the fact that Jeff's computer is not Windows 10 ready or Windows 11 ready. But if you don't want it to count against you and you don't want the client raising hands and going like, are you not listening to me? I told you that one doesn't matter. Stop pulling up on reports and hounding me for it. Every single one of those as a little trigger exception, you could say toggle exception monitoring, and that's how you get that strike through I was talking about. So what that says is we understand that Jeff's computer is not, I was gonna say, ain't Windows 11 ready, is not Windows 11 ready, but it won't count against it. So this it tracked yes, scored no. So this is a good way to kind of fine tune, prune your policies. It's a little bit more advanced, but it's something that's good to know because you'll inevitably run into a scenario where you're like, we know that's a problem, but I'm tired of having to explain to the client that we know, but it doesn't count, but we're tracking it, but whatever. You just go strike through, we're done. So hopefully my 20-minute discussion was enlightening on policies. And again, if I could urge you to give them a shot, I would definitely start with specifically like Windows 11 readiness is pretty good. And even if that one isn't to your liking, another one that you could use for Windows, because I know a lot of MSPs are doing it now. If you go to like endpoint policies, one of the ones besides Windows 11 readiness is current OS. I think it's version actually, yeah. Yeah, and you can change it to say like we're looking for Windows 11. So that way what'll happen is if I set this policy right now, let's just do it. Let me do a little test right here. Put a bunch of exclamation marks so we know it's ours. Okay. I'm going to rerun the sync right now. And what'll happen is, again, that policy won't get checked for a calendar day unless I sync it right now. So that sync job is going to run. And that policy is now telling CloudRadial to go scan every computer in here. And if they don't have Windows 11, tell me, right? Show me the issues there. So what we're looking for is we're looking for my quad exclamation mark as I put it under security. Who doesn't have Windows 11 stuff? And here's the ones that are stragglers who are still on anything but Windows 11, right?
Yeah, those are all testing machines. Who's Wade?
He's on MacBook Pro,
He's
so
on a Mac. Okay.
I find it hard for him. That's where you come into the thing where if Safi were my client and goes like, Wade, do you know what you're doing? You go like, oh, my bad. Let me just change that to desktops and or just Windows OS people, right? So you can get into the idea pretty easily of just like, where would you use this? Why would you use this? Scenarios. Don't go in there thinking you got to do all the policies for all the things, but something like that, pretty useful. And again, really easy to visualize something and have that quick conversation going. We know these are out of date. We know this is going to be a problem. Do you want to do something about it? And then I'll chain this with one last thing, and then I'll open the floor to questions because I did monopolize the thing. Sorry, everybody. Is if this becomes a discussion and you don't want to get hammered again, Safi's my client. She's not listening to me. I've tracked that she's, not doing this OS version thing. She's out of date. I don't want to support it. I don't want to cover it. They pay their bills. I don't want to fire them. I'm in a sticky situation. Chuck it in the planner, right? Hit this planner button, and this literally will say something like, okay, this is a security issue. Resolve this policy exception now, this quarter, whatever have you. You can put your notes in here, but this is just a fast way that if you want to chuck that in there and then go, okay, noted. Then later when you go to run a QBR business review and you go back to the planner in CloudRadial, that resolve exception will be there. So you can say like, hey, we really have to do this. And or if they say, no, thank you, I don't care, stop bothering me, I don't have the money, you go, all righty then, right click, move to options. Again, this is not the QBR training session, so I'm not going to go too deep on this. But the idea is that it's not just to say, I've done it and pat on the back and don't fire me. Like that's fun. But the other one that's really good is like, if I'm your consultant and I'm telling you you're in major risk and you go, I don't care, I don't want to listen to you, I go, I've proposed it, you've declined it. Maybe we want to change the status to full on declined or whatever have you, right? So we're going into our, where am I looking for? Status. I'll say client declined. Okay, we'll change that up. Then all of a sudden I can go like, hey, I talked to Safi about it last quarter. We've notated it. We have reports on it, whatever. I've done my due diligence and there's no more finger pointing going like, you never said, you never brought it up. It's like, it's been in your portal. It's been reported. We have it tracked. You signed off on it, whatever, in the portal, right? Do you have to do this in CloudRadial? I am the worst CloudRadial representative ever because I always say, no, you can do this however you want to, but it's a lot easier when you have a platform that does all the context in one. So that's how policies are designed. That's why they're designed to work together. And that's why the visualization kind of adds all this stuff up in one.